The storm that hit Redemption Ridge that October night of 1887 seemed to carry more than just rain and thunder. It brought secrets, fear, and a small figure stumbling through the muddy streets like a ghost seeking sanctuary. The lonely cowboy known simply as Loner Cowman watched from his ramshackle cabin on the outskirts of town as lightning illuminated the desperate silhouette of a child, no more than 10 years old, clutching something tight against his chest. At 52, Loner Cowman had seen enough of life's cruelties to recognize desperation when it knocked on his door. His weathered face, marked by decades under the merciless sun and countless battles with both men and conscience, showed no surprise when the boy collapsed on his porch. What surprised him was the immediate surge of protectiveness that rose in his chest, a feeling he thought had died along with his own family 15 years ago. The boy was soaked to the bone, his clothes torn and bloodied. Dark bruises painted his thin arms like a map of suffering, and his eyes, those haunting green eyes, darted around with the wariness of a hunted animal. In his trembling hands, he clutched a leather satchel as if his life depended on it. "Please, mister," the child whispered, his voice barely audible above the storm. "They're coming for me. They said they'd kill me if I told anyone about what I saw." Loner Cowman didn't hesitate. He scooped the boy up and carried him inside, his mind already calculating the risks. The townspeople of Redemption Ridge had made their feelings about him crystal clear over the years. They tolerated his presence because he kept to himself and occasionally helped with problems that required his particular set of skills: tracking outlaws, dealing with dangerous wildlife, settling disputes that the sheriff couldn't handle. But tolerance was a far cry from acceptance, and harboring a mysterious child would push that fragile relationship past its breaking point. As he tended to the boy's wounds by lamplight, Loner Cowman learned his name was Timothy, and he'd been running for 3 days straight. The child spoke in fragments, his words tumbling out between sobs and shivers. He mentioned seeing something terrible in the old mine shaft north of town, something involving the important men and boxes full of money. But exhaustion soon claimed him, and he fell asleep, clutching the satchel, even in unconsciousness, unwilling to let it go. The next morning brought trouble in the form of Sheriff Morrison and 3 of the town's most prominent citizens: banker Harold Whitmore, mine owner Ezra Blackwood, and cattle baron Marcus Thornfield. They stood on Loner Cowman's porch like a tribunal of judgment, their faces grim with purpose. "We're looking for a boy," Sheriff Morrison announced, his hand resting meaningfully on his gun. "About 10 years old, brown hair, green eyes, stole something valuable from Mr. Whitmore's bank. Dangerous little thief, that one." Loner Cowman met their stares with the steady gaze of a man who'd faced down worse odds. "Haven't seen any children around here, Sheriff. You know I keep to myself." Banker Whitmore stepped forward, his expensive suit incongruous against the rustic backdrop. "Now see here, cowboy. That boy is a menace to this community. He's been spreading lies about respectable citizens, trying to cause trouble. If you're hiding him, you're harboring a criminal. And we all know how this town feels about criminals," added Ezra Blackwood, his voice carrying an unmistakable threat. The tension crackled like electricity in the air. Loner Cowman knew these men wielded the real power in Redemption Ridge. They could make his already difficult life impossible, or worse. But something in their desperation, in the way their eyes darted nervously, told him that Timothy's story might hold more truth than they wanted to admit. "I told you I haven't seen any boy," he repeated, his voice steady as granite. After they left, making vague threats about searching every building in town, loner Cowman found Timothy awake and trembling behind a stack of firewood where he'd hidden when he heard the voices. "Those were the men," Timothy whispered, his face pale with terror. "The ones from the mine. They killed my pa when he found out what they were doing." The words hit loner Cowman like a physical blow. Timothy's father had been murdered, and now the boy was the only witness to whatever dark secret these powerful men were hiding. The satchel, he realized, must contain evidence of their crimes. As word spread through town that the lonely cowboy might be harboring the dangerous thief, the atmosphere grew increasingly hostile. Townspeople who had merely ignored him before now glared with open suspicion. Shopkeepers refused to serve him. Children threw rocks at his cabin windows while their parents looked on approvingly. But loner Cowman had made his choice. That evening, as he taught Timothy how to clean and load his spare rifle, he saw something in the boy's eyes that reminded him of his own son. The determination to survive, the spark of hope that refused to be extinguished despite overwhelming odds. "Why are you helping me?" Timothy asked as they shared a simple meal of beans and hardtack. "Everyone says you're mean and dangerous." Loner Cowman was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "Sometimes, boy, doing what's right means standing alone against the whole world. And sometimes that's exactly where you need to be." Outside, the wind howled like a harbinger of the storm that was coming. Not from the sky this time, but from the hearts of men who would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. Loner Cowman checked his weapons one more time and settled in for what he knew would be a long, dangerous night. The real battle for Timothy's life and for the truth was just beginning. The second day brought an escalation that loner Cowman had anticipated but hoped to avoid. By noon, a crowd had gathered outside the general store, their voices rising in heated discussion about the criminal child and the stubborn cowboy who refused to cooperate with the law. Mrs. Henderson, the preacher's wife, stood on a wooden crate addressing the growing mob with righteous indignation. "That man has always been trouble," she declared, her voice carrying across the dusty main street. "Living out there like a hermit, refusing to attend church, keeping to himself like he's got something to hide. And now he's protecting a thief. What kind of Christian community allows this?" Loner Cowman watched from a distance as the crowd grew larger and more agitated. He'd come to town for supplies, knowing it might be his last chance before things got truly dangerous. Timothy was safely hidden in a cave system he'd discovered years ago, about 2 miles from his cabin, a place where the boy could stay warm and dry while remaining invisible to searchers. At the hardware store, old Pete Garrison, who'd always been neutral toward the lonely cowboy, pulled him aside. "Listen, friend," Pete whispered, glancing nervously around. "I don't know what you're mixed up in, but those 3 men, Whitmore, Blackwood, and Thornfield, they've been asking questions, not just about the boy, but about you. Your past, your family, why you came to Redemption Ridge. They're digging, and when men like that start digging, they usually find what they're looking for, whether it's there or not." The warning chilled loner Cowman more than he cared to admit. His past was exactly that, past, but it contained enough darkness to destroy any credibility he might have in protecting Timothy. 15 years ago, he'd been a different man with a different name, running from his own demons and the consequences of choices that had cost him everything he held dear. That afternoon, while checking on Timothy in the cave, Loner Cowman finally convinced the boy to show him what was in the leather satchel. With trembling fingers, Timothy opened it to reveal a collection of documents, photographs, and what appeared to be a detailed ledger written in multiple hands. "My pa was the bookkeeper for the mine," Timothy explained, his voice barely above a whisper. He found out they weren't just mining silver, they were using the mine to hide stolen money, laundering it through fake mining operations. And there's more. They've been cheating the government out of taxes, bribing officials, even— He paused, swallowing hard. Even selling weapons to hostile Indian tribes to keep conflicts going so they could get military contracts. Loner Cowman studied the documents by lamplight, his blood growing colder with each page. The evidence was damning and detailed, implicating not just the 3 local power brokers, but a network of corruption that reached all the way to the territorial capital. No wonder they were desperate to silence Timothy. This information could destroy them all and send them to federal prison for decades. "Your father was a brave man," he told Timothy, "and a smart one. He documented everything. He said if anything happened to him, I should take this to the federal marshal in Denver," Timothy replied. "But they killed him before he could tell me how to get there safely. And now they want to kill me, too." That evening, as Loner Cowman returned to his cabin, he found it surrounded by a dozen armed men led by Sheriff Morrison. The sheriff stepped forward, his badge glinting in the lamplight, but his nervous demeanor suggested he wasn't entirely comfortable with his orders. "This has gone far enough," Morrison announced. "We have a warrant to search your property for the stolen goods and the boy. Stand aside." Loner Cowman remained perfectly still, his hands visible, but ready. "What stolen goods would those be, Sheriff? And what judge signed that warrant?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a gunshot. Everyone present knew that Judge Crawford was in the pocket of the 3 powerful men, but the legal facade had to be maintained. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," Morrison warned. "We know you're hiding something. The whole town knows it." As the men searched his cabin, finding nothing, Loner Cowman noticed something interesting. 3 of the searchers weren't locals. They were hard-faced men with the look of professional gunfighters, the kind who asked no questions as long as the money was good. Whitmore, Blackwood, and Thornfield weren't just using local pressure anymore. They were bringing in outside muscle. After the search yielded nothing, the men departed with muttered threats and promises to expand their efforts. But Loner Cowman had seen the calculation in their eyes. They were running out of patience, and desperate men with unlimited resources were the most dangerous kind. Later that night, as he made his way back to Timothy's hiding place, Loner Cowman was ambushed by 2 of the hired gunmen. The fight was brief but vicious, ending with both attackers unconscious and the lonely cowboy nursing a knife wound to his shoulder. The message was clear. They were done playing games. When he reached the cave, he found Timothy awake and frightened, having heard the distant sounds of the struggle. "They're never going to stop, are they?" the boy asked. Loner Cowman sat down heavily, feeling every one of his 52 years. "No, son, they're not. Which means we need to stop running and start fighting back." He pulled out a piece of paper and began writing by lamplight. "I'm going to send a message to someone I know in Denver, someone who can get word to the federal marshals. But it's going to take time, and things are going to get worse before they get better." Timothy watched him write, his young face grave with understanding beyond his years. "What if they kill us before help comes?" Lona Cowman looked up from his writing, meeting the boy's eyes with steady resolve. "Then we'll make sure this evidence gets to the right people anyway. Your father died protecting the truth, Timothy. We're going to honor that sacrifice." As dawn approached, painting the sky in shades of hope and warning, Lona Cowman made a decision that would change everything. He was done hiding, done running, done letting evil men terrorize an innocent child. It was time to take the fight to them, no matter the cost. The war for Timothy's life and the soul of Redemption Ridge was about to begin in earnest. The third day dawned with an ominous stillness that seemed to press down on Redemption Ridge like a suffocating blanket. Lona Cowman had spent the night moving Timothy to an even more secure location, an abandoned prospector's cabin high in the rocky hills, accessible only by a treacherous mountain path that few knew existed. His shoulder throbbed from the knife wound, but his resolve had never been stronger. The message he'd sent to Denver through a trusted contact was now racing toward the territorial capital, but help was still days away. In the meantime, the three powerful men were tightening their grip on the town like a noose, and the pressure was beginning to show cracks in unexpected places. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the town's only physician and one of the few people who'd ever shown Lona Cowman basic human decency, appeared at his cabin just after sunrise. Her usually composed demeanor was shattered, replaced by barely controlled fear and anger. "They came to my clinic last night," she said without preamble, her hands shaking as she spoke. "Whitmore, Blackwood, and Thornfield. They wanted to know if I'd treated any injured children recently. When I refused to answer, they threatened to have my medical license revoked, said they'd spread rumors about my competence until no one in the territory would trust me." Lona Cowman invited her inside, noting the dark circles under her eyes and the way she kept glancing over her shoulder. "What did you tell them?" "Nothing, but they're not just after the boy anymore. They're after anyone who might help him. Or you." She paused, studying his bandaged shoulder. "That needs proper attention. And I think I know why they're so desperate." Dr. Mitchell reached into her medical bag and pulled out a newspaper from the territorial capital, dated just 3 days ago. The headline made Lona Cowman's blood run cold. "Federal investigation launched into territorial mining corruption. Grand jury convenes next month." "The federal government is already suspicious," she explained. "If that boy's evidence reaches the right people, it won't just confirm their suspicions, it'll give them everything they need for convictions. These men aren't just protecting their reputations anymore, they're fighting for their lives." As Dr. Mitchell tended to his wound, Lona Cowman shared what he'd learned from Timothy's documents. Her face grew paler with each revelation, but her resolve seemed to strengthen rather than weaken. "That child's father was murdered for trying to do the right thing," she said firmly. "I won't let his sacrifice be in vain." "What do you need from me?" Before he could answer, the sound of approaching horses filled the air. Through the window, they could see Sheriff Morrison leading a much larger group this time. At least 20 men, including several more of the hired gunfighters. But what made Loner Cowman's heart sink was the sight of ordinary townspeople among them, men he'd known for years, their faces twisted with mob mentality and righteous anger. "Come out, cowboy," Morrison shouted. "We know you're in there, and we know you're hiding that thief. The town council has voted. You have 1 hour to produce the boy and leave Redemption Ridge forever, or we'll burn you out." Dr. Mitchell moved to the window, her medical bag in hand. "I'm coming out, Sheriff," she called. "I'm just treating a patient." "Doc Mitchell?" Morrison's voice carried surprise and concern. "What are you doing here?" She stepped onto the porch, her chin raised defiantly. "Practicing medicine, which last I checked wasn't a crime in this territory. This man has a knife wound that needs attention." The crowd stirred uneasily. Dr. Mitchell was respected and needed. She'd delivered half their children and saved countless lives over the years. Threatening her was a line most weren't willing to cross. Banker Whitmore pushed through the crowd, his face flushed with anger. "Doctor, you're interfering with official business. That man is harboring a dangerous criminal." "What I see," Dr. Mitchell replied with ice in her voice, "is a wounded man, and a lot of people who've forgotten what justice actually looks like. Where's your evidence? Where's your due process? Since when do we burn people out based on accusations?" Her words hit their mark. Several of the townspeople began looking uncomfortable, shifting nervously and avoiding eye contact. The mob mentality was powerful, but it was also fragile when confronted with moral clarity. Ezra Blackwood stepped forward, his voice carrying the authority of wealth and influence. "The evidence is clear, Doctor. The boy stole important documents from Mr. Whitmore's bank. We have witnesses." "Funny thing about witnesses," came a new voice from the edge of the crowd. Old Pete Garrison pushed through, his weathered face grim with determination. "I've been thinking about what I witnessed 15 years ago, when certain people first came to this town with more money than any honest mining operation should produce." The silence that followed was deafening. Pete Garrison had lived in Redemption Ridge longer than almost anyone, and his word carried weight. Whitmore, Blackwood, and Thornfield exchanged panicked glances. "You're talking nonsense, old man," Thornfield growled. "The heat's gotten to your brain." But Pete wasn't finished. "I remember when young Timothy's father started asking questions about discrepancies in the mining reports. I remember how he was found dead just days later, supposedly killed by bandits who left his money untouched. And I remember how quickly certain people wanted his son to disappear." The crowd was beginning to fracture. Doubt was creeping in, replacing blind anger with uncomfortable questions. Loner Cowman realized this was his moment, not to fight, but to speak the truth that had been buried for too long. He stepped onto the porch beside Dr. Mitchell, his presence commanding attention despite his wounded state. "Pete's right to ask questions," he said, his voice carrying across the crowd, "because Timothy didn't steal anything. He inherited evidence of crimes that go back years, evidence that certain people will kill to keep hidden." "Lies!" Whitmore shouted. "Don't listen to him. He's a known troublemaker, a man with no ties to this community." "You're right about one thing, Loner," Cowman replied. "I don't have ties to this community, which means I don't have anything to lose by telling the truth. Timothy's father discovered that your mining operation is a front for money laundering, tax evasion, and illegal arms sales. He documented everything, and he died for it. The accusations hung in the air like thunder before lightning. Several of the hired gunfighters began moving their hands toward their weapons, but the presence of so many townspeople complicated any violent response. Sheriff Morrison looked torn between his official duties and his growing suspicions. "Those are serious charges, cowboy. You got proof?" "The proof is what they're trying to destroy," Loner Cowman replied. "The documents Timothy's father died protecting. The evidence that will send these men to federal prison for the rest of their lives." Suddenly, Marcus Thornfield snapped. Drawing his pistol, he aimed it directly at Loner Cowman. "Enough! I'm tired of listening to this nonsense. Sheriff, arrest this man for harboring a criminal, or I'll do your job for you." The crowd erupted in chaos. Some people scattered for cover, others shouted in confusion, and Dr. Mitchell stepped protectively in front of Loner Cowman despite the danger. But before Thornfield could pull the trigger, a rifle shot rang out from the hills above. Timothy stood on a rocky outcrop, his small figure silhouetted against the sky, holding Loner Cowman's spare rifle with surprising steadiness. His shot had knocked the pistol from Thornfield's hand without injuring anyone, a display of marksmanship that would have made his protector proud. "I'm Timothy Morrison," the boy shouted, his young voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence. "My father was murdered by these men for discovering their crimes, and I have the proof." The revelation that the boy shared the sheriff's surname sent another shock through the crowd. Sheriff Morrison stared up at the hills, his face pale with recognition and growing horror. That's my nephew," he whispered. "My brother's boy. They told me he'd run away after his father's death, that he'd stolen money and disappeared." The lies were unraveling faster than the three conspirators could contain them. As the truth began to emerge, Loner Cowman realized that the real battle was just beginning. The powerful men were cornered now, and cornered animals were the most dangerous of all. The fourth day brought a reckoning that would forever change Redemption Ridge. As dawn broke over the mountains, federal marshals rode into town. Not the help Loner Cowman had summoned, but an advance team that had been investigating the territorial corruption for months. Their arrival was perfectly timed, as if orchestrated by fate itself. Marshal James Harrison, a stern man with silver hair and eyes like steel, had received Loner Cowman's message just as his investigation was reaching a critical point. The evidence Timothy carried was the final piece of a puzzle the federal government had been assembling for over a year. The confrontation came to a head in the town square, where most of Redemption Ridge's population had gathered. Timothy stood beside his uncle, Sheriff Morrison, who was still reeling from the revelation that his own brother had been murdered and his nephew had been branded a criminal by the very men responsible. "Citizens of Redemption Ridge," Marshal Harrison announced, his voice carrying the authority of federal law, "we are here to arrest Harold Whitmore, Ezra Blackwood, and Marcus Thornfield on charges of conspiracy, murder, tax evasion, money laundering, and treason for selling weapons to hostile forces." The three men stood surrounded by their hired gunfighters, but the odds had shifted dramatically. The federal marshals were experienced lawmen. The townspeople were no longer on their side, and the truth was finally in the open. Whitmore made one last desperate attempt to maintain control. "This is all lies and fabrication," he shouted. "That boy is a disturbed child making up stories. You can't trust the word of a traumatized orphan." It was then that Dr. Mitchell stepped forward, carrying a leather portfolio that made the three conspirators' faces go white with terror. "Actually, Marshal, the boy isn't our only witness. I've been documenting suspicious deaths and injuries in this town for years, including Timothy's father's murder, which showed clear signs of execution rather than robbery." She opened the portfolio to reveal detailed medical records, photographs, and her own carefully kept notes. "I've also been treating several of their hired men for various injuries over the past year, including gunshot wounds that were clearly not from hunting accidents. I have records of everything." Pete Garrison stepped forward as well, his aged hands steady as he produced a small notebook. "And I've been keeping track of the discrepancies in mining reports, the mysterious shipments that came and went in the night, and the sudden wealth that certain people displayed despite poor mining yields. 15 years of observations, all written down." The net was closing, and the three conspirators knew it. In desperation, Thornfield signaled to his gunfighters, but before violence could erupt, Timothy's clear young voice cut through the tension. "There's something else," the boy said, reaching into his satchel one more time. "Something my pa told me to save for last." He pulled out a small metal cylinder, no bigger than his thumb. "My pa said this was insurance, a recording device he got from a traveling inventor. He recorded their meetings, their plans, even their confession about killing people who got in their way." The silence that followed was absolute. In 1887, recording devices were rare and expensive, but they existed, and everyone present understood the implications. The three men's own voices, preserved on metal, would condemn them beyond any possibility of denial. Ezra Blackwood broke first, his composure cracking like ice in spring. "It wasn't supposed to go this far," he cried. "We never meant for anyone to get hurt. It was just business, just money." "Just money?" Sheriff Morrison's voice shook with rage as he stepped toward the man who had orchestrated his brother's murder. "You killed my brother for just money?" Marshal Harrison raised his hand, maintaining order even as emotions ran high. "Mr. Blackwood, anything you say can and will be used against you in federal court. I strongly advise you to remain silent until you can speak with an attorney." But Blackwood was beyond caring about legal advice. The weight of guilt and fear had finally broken him. "Harold planned it all," he sobbed, pointing at Whitmore. "He said we had to silence anyone who threatened the operation. Marcus carried out the killings. I just went along with it." The confession sent shockwaves through the crowd. Whitmore lunged at Blackwood, screaming about betrayal, while Thornfield tried to draw his backup pistol. But the federal marshals were ready, and within moments all three men were in custody, their hired gunfighters surrendering without a fight when faced with federal authority. As the dust settled and the criminals were led away in chains, the townspeople of Redemption Ridge began to grapple with the reality of what had transpired. They had been manipulated, lied to, and turned against an innocent child and the man who protected him. Mrs. Henderson, the preacher's wife who had led the mob just days before, approached Lona Cowman with tears in her eyes. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "We were wrong about you, about everything. Can you ever forgive us?" Lona Cowman looked around at the faces of his neighbors, people who had shunned him, threatened him, and nearly destroyed him for doing what was right. But he also saw genuine remorse, the recognition of their mistakes, and the desire to make amends. "Forgiveness is a choice we make every day," he said quietly. "What matters now is what we do going forward." Dr. Mitchell stepped beside him, her hand resting gently on Timothy's shoulder. "The boy will need a home, a family. His uncle is a good man, but he's still processing everything that's happened." Sheriff Morrison nodded, his own eyes wet with tears. "Timothy can stay with me, of course, but—" He looked at Lona Cowman with something approaching reverence. "I'd be honored if you'd consider being part of his life. You saved him when no one else would. You're the closest thing to a father he has now." Timothy looked up at Lona Cowman with those bright green eyes that had haunted the cowboy's dreams. "Would you stay?" the boy asked simply. "Would you be my family?" For the first time in 15 years, Lona Cowman felt the walls around his heart begin to crumble. He had come to Redemption Ridge as a broken man, seeking only solitude and penance for his past mistakes. But in protecting this brave child, he had found something he thought was lost forever: purpose, connection, and the possibility of redemption. "I'd be honored, son," he said, his voice thick with emotion. As the sun set over Redemption Ridge that evening, the town began the long process of healing. The corruption that had poisoned it for years was finally exposed and purged. The federal investigation would continue, but the immediate danger was over. Lona Cowman sat on his porch with Timothy beside him, watching the stars emerge in the clear mountain sky. The boy was drawing in a notebook, not documenting crimes this time, but sketching the horses they planned to raise together on the expanded ranch they would build. "Do you think my pa would be proud of me?" Timothy asked quietly. Lona Cowman put his arm around the boy's shoulders, feeling the weight of responsibility and love that came with being a father figure. "Son, your father was the bravest man I never met. He died protecting the truth, and you carried on his fight when you were too young to understand the danger. He would be more than proud. He would be amazed." Dr. Mitchell approached from the path, carrying a basket of food and wearing a smile that transformed her usually serious face. Over the past few days, she had become more than just Timothy's doctor. She had become part of their unlikely family. "The town council met today," she announced. "They voted unanimously to name you both honorary citizens of Redemption Ridge, with all the rights and protections that entails. They also voted to establish a scholarship fund in Timothy's father's name for children who show courage in the face of adversity." As they shared dinner together, three people who had found family in the most unexpected circumstances, Lona Cowman reflected on the strange turns life could take. He had spent 15 years running from his past, convinced that he was beyond redemption. But sometimes salvation came not from forgetting the past, but from using its lessons to protect the future. Timothy fell asleep against his shoulder as the evening grew late, the notebook still clutched in his small hands. The drawings showed not just horses, but a house with 3 bedrooms, a garden where Dr. Mitchell could grow medicinal herbs, and a workshop where a lonely cowboy could teach a brave boy all the skills he would need to face whatever challenges life might bring. In the distance, the lights of Redemption Ridge twinkled like earthbound stars, no longer the hostile territory it had been just days before, but a community learning to live up to its name. The town that had once hated him now looked to him as a hero, but Lona Cowman knew the truth was simpler and more profound. He wasn't a hero. He was just a man who had chosen to do what was right when it mattered most. And in making that choice, he had discovered that redemption wasn't something you earned through suffering, but something you claimed through love, courage, and the willingness to stand up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. As he carried Timothy inside and tucked him into the bed they had set up in the cabin's second room, Loner Cowman whispered a promise to the sleeping child and to the memory of the father who had died protecting him. "You're safe now, son. You're home, and no one will ever hurt you again." Outside, the wind carried the sound of laughter from the town below, where people were learning to trust again, to hope again, and to believe that sometimes, even in the darkest circumstances, love and courage could triumph over fear and greed. The lonely cowboy was lonely no more. He had found his family, his purpose, and his redemption in the most unlikely place of all, in the heart of a town that had hated him, through the love of a child who had needed him, and in the courage to stand alone against the darkness until the light could find its way home. The story of Redemption Ridge would be told for generations, not as a tale of corruption and violence, but as a testament to the power of one person's choice to do what's right, no matter the cost. And at the center of that story would always be the memory of a lonely cowboy who discovered that the greatest act of bravery isn't facing down your enemies, but opening your heart to love again. Hello, how are you? Did you enjoy the story? Like, share, comment on which city you're watching from, and subscribe to the channel The Best Wild West to help us continue adding new amazing videos. Thank you very much, and come back often.